tribute or final tribute to Amma. Lulliethangi Moodley, who was with us for the past 87 years. We'll ask one and all to please rise, put your hands together, let's Namah Shivaya Vandanadam Tarvadu Imi Porudum Ennangal Neegathatalvadu Isanadi Potri Endranadi Potri Desanadi Potri Shivanchevadi Potri Maya Piripadukku மன்னனடி போற்றி 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 ஓம் திருப்பற்றம்பலம். எல்லோருக்கும் மிக்க நன்றி, வணக்கம். அமரங்கள். ப்ளீஸ் பி சீட்டட். Ladies and gentlemen, you can please come forward and you can pay your respect to Amma, thereafter the family thereafter. Thank you. பெருநறிய மணிவல்ல முனியகன் புள்ளி கரத்தையே பெருநறிய பிரமம் பெருநறிய பிரம புலவரி தென்மானிவன் நன்று ஒரு நெறிய மண்பை துணன் ஞான சம்பந்தன் உரை செய்து ஒரு நெறிய மனுமை துணன் ஞான சம்பந்தன் உரை செய்து திருநறிய தமிழ்வன் திருநறிய தமிழ்வன் அவர் கொள்வின் தீத்தான் எளிதாமே திருச்சிற்றம்பலம். கரும்பிவிளம் நமஸ்தே நமஸ்தே இன்ப விநாயகனே இன்ப விநாயகனே இன்ப விநாயகனே எங்கள் மலர்ப்பது பணிந்தனே இன்ப விநாயகனே எங்கள் மலர்ப்பது பணிந்தனே இன்ப விநாயகனே அன்பவன் சோலையில் அமர்ந்திடும் அரிசே 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 இன்ப விநாயகனே எங்கள் மலர்ப்பது பணிந்தனே இன்ப விநாயகனே தினமும் உன்னருள் புகழ் நினைத்திடல் வேண்டும் இதய மலத்தனுள் இனந்திடும் கண்ணில் இதய மலத்தனல் இனந்திடும் கண்ணிலே இதய மலத்தனல் இனந்திடும் கண்ணிலே நின்றும் உன்னாலும் மாறேவினே என்றும் உன்னாலும் மாறேவினே இன்ப விநாயகனே எங்கள் மலர்ப்பது பணிந்தனே இன்ப விநாயகனே தினமும் உன்னருள் புகழ் நினைத்திடல் வேண்டும் தினமும் உன்னருள் புகழ் நினைத்திடல் வேண்டும் தினமும் உன்னருள் புகழ் நினைத்திடல் வேண்டும் தினமும் உன்னருள் புகழ் வேண்டும் என்றும் சொல்வழும் நீர் வேண்டும் என்றும் சொல்வழும் நீர் வேண்டும் இன்ப விநாயகனே எழில் மலப்பன் பணிந்தனே இன்ப விநாயகனே 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 திருச்சிற்றம்பலம் இல்லக விளக்குது இருள் கெடுப்பது சொல்லக விளக்குது ஜோதி உள்ளது பல்லகர் விளக்குது பலருள்ளது நல்லகர் விளக்குது நமசிவாய பொற்றுணை இருந்தடி ஓரன்ன கை தொட சொற்றுணை ஜோதி வானவன் பொற்றுணை இருந்தடி ஓரன்ன கை தொட சொற்றுணை ஜோதி வனவன் பொற்றுணை இருந்தடி ஓரன்ன கை தொழ கற்றுணை மூப்பினோம் காதலை பலத்தின் கற்றுணை மூப்பினோம் காதலை பலத்தின் நற்றுணையாவது நற்றுணையாவது நமசிவாய நற்றுணையாவது நமசிவாய இல்லகர் விளக்குது இல்லகர் விளக்குது இருள் கிடப்பது சொல்லகர் விளக்குது ஜோதி உள்ளது இல்லகர் விளக்குது இருள் கிடப்பது சொல்லகர் விளக்குது ஜோதி உள்ளது பல்லகர் விளக்குது பலரும் காண்பது பல்லகர் விளக்குது பலரும் காண்பது நல்லகர் விளக்குது நல்லகர் விளக்குது நமசிவாய பூவினும் கருங்களே பூவினும் கருங்களே பொங்கும் கமலே ஆவினும் கருங்களே ஆனந்த சரக்குகள் பூவினும் கருங்களே பொங்கும் கமலே ஆவினும் கருங்கள் ஆனந்த சரக்குகள் பூவினும் கருங்களே நாவிலும் கருங்களே நமசிவாய நாவிலும் கருங்களே நமசிவாய மாப்பிய தருணியே மாவிலே தருணியே மது மகத்தில் ஒப்பினை தீரந்தனே ஓரல்ல கை கொட மாப்பினை தருணிய மது மகத்தில் ஒப்பினை தீரந்தனே ஓரல்ல கை கொட நாப்பினை தகுவிய காமசிவாய பத்த நாப்பினை தகுவிய காமசிவாய பத்த எத்தவெல்லாம் தன்னுக்கு எத்தவெல்லாம் தன்னுக்கு ஈடுகள் இல்லை திருச்சிற்றம்பலம் As you know, our dear mum was a very, very strong Saivite. One of the songs that was sent to me, mostly on Thevaram, Thiru Vasalam, Thiru Harapal, around an old song on Lord Muruga, ladies and gentlemen, in a very, very famous ragam which you really like, is called Desh. In Ulagaram, I did in Desh ragam, it's Amma's favorite ragam. Tumbum Nergalil is also a favorite song as well, which I'm going to do later on in the program. But I'm going to do the Muruga song in Desh. நான் படும் பாரி பன்னெண்டு நாளாய் நான் படும் பாரி பன்னெண்டு நாளாய் நான் படும் பாரி பதிலிருக்கின்றேனோ இனி கடமோடு நான் படுப்பான் பதியில் என்னையோ என்னிட மூடு உன்னருடன் மயக்கும் உன்னருடன் மயக்கும் உன்ற மொழிகள் உன்னருடன் மயக்கும் உன்ற மோகம் கொண்டே என்ன எழுவான் முத்துக்குமாரா நான் மோகம் கொண்டே Ladies and gentlemen, our MC for today is the son of Apama, Ravi Moodley. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Nelson. Resounding rendition of the Tewara. My mother would have loved the youth that accompanied you today on the tabla. She loved to see young people sing and engage in our Indian culture. I'm Ravi Moodley, the youngest son of Lulliethangi Moodley. We lost our dad many years ago, and my mum was matriarch in our family. Extremely strong, carried herself with dignity through the many years that she had to live without my dad. And today we mourn her loss, but we are comforted that we spent valuable time with her, that she is now relieved of pain. She lived a full life, specifically towards the last 20 years or so. She engaged in the service, various services, including here at MTSS, and a service in the Navy area, senior citizens. Everything she wanted to do when she was healthy, she did it. She went to India, she went to Tirupati, she took off her hair, which surprised us all. And she tried to live a fuller life in the latter part of her life, when all of us were standing on our own 2 feet, because in the earlier part of her life, she gave her all just to make sure that we were all set. I want to introduce to you my eldest brother, Rajan Moodley, as the first of 4 speakers. As the first of 4 speakers this morning. We'll have Rajan kick that off with his reflections of his relationship with Mom, and then Nelson will render a few more tevarams, about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll have another speaker, Nile, a grandson, and then 2 more speakers, but I'll guide you through it. Rajan, if you can come up, please.
So, where do I begin this story? This is an extraordinary story. Extraordinary story. So I think an extraordinary story requires perhaps an extraordinary angle to it. So I'm going to start from the end. In the last 6 weeks of my mom's life, she spent it at an institution called the Nazareth House, which is run by the Catholic organization in South Africa. As you know, they are renowned for their good organization. It's a very well-appointed facility, which is adjacent to Entebeni Hospital up on the hill. And it was surrounded by tranquility and clean, open fresh gardens and wide spaces. She had a room up there. And in this very well appointed facility, we would repeatedly go to her into a little room and chat and comfort her. Obviously, in those confines, she sought now and then to go into the gardens. And I remember on one particular occasion, 2 or 3 weeks ago, she asked to be wheeled out. And so I was there and I wheeled her out on the wheelchair, down the ramp, and we got into the gardens. That facility is actually appointed by the Catholics, and so there's various statues of Jesus and Mother Mary and Saint Peter, Saint Paul, etc. Every 5 or 10 meters you go along the internal corridors, there's a statue. So when Mom got to the garden, there was a statue there as well. Actually, when you looked at that facility, you almost thought that you were in a monastery, because there was a chaplain sometimes walking with his robes, and there were these nuns with their habits. So you almost felt like you were in a monastery. But anyway, when we got down to the garden, she remarked upon some hanging flowers on the wall and said, "That looks pretty." And then what caught her eye was lilies growing in the quadrangle there. And those lilies were of the variety called anthuriums. I know about that because of my wife, who's got an interest in flowers. Otherwise I would not have known. Anyway, when she looked at an anthurium there, she said, "But that's very pretty. It looks such a strong plant. Look at it, it's red and it's got a bit of mauve in it." And I looked at it and I thought, well, Mother is right. Amongst the other plants that stood out, and it looked vigorous and full of life. And that set me thinking, because if you look back at the 1800s, in another monastery in Austria sat a man called Gregor Mendel. Now Gregor Mendel was a monk, but he wasn't a monk by choice. There was no jobs in Europe at the time. And when you became a monk, you got a stipend and you got a place to live in and some food, and so you were sorted. So you were well looked after. So Gregor had an inquiring mind. In his spare time, he planted peas. He looked at the tall pea trees and the short pea trees, and he looked at the yellow peas and the green peas, and he crossed them. And sometimes it intrigued him. He crossed a short with a tall, and he got a tall plant, etc. Anyway, to fast forward, he developed the 3 principles of genetics. What's called the law of segregation, when the cell divides, a law of independent association, where all the genes go randomly, and the law of dominance, where, like, for instance, a short plant marries a tall plant and you still get a tall plant thereafter, which means that the tall one is dominant. So those 3 principles still rule us today. Brilliant mind from a monk sitting looking at his garden, and that took me back then to that same lily. So what relevance has that got to do with my mom here today? Well, it has, because under the winter skies of 6 June 1938 in Durban was born a hybrid lily. She was known to her side of the family, which was not Indian, as Lily. We knew her as Lulliethangi Moodley, and I often heard Uncle Thomas, who was a brother, his wife, referred to her as Lily. So she was known as Lily then. And I thought here was this hybrid lily that was born. And Gregor Mendel said that when you have a hybrid, you have strong genetic traits and you have an independent association of genes, and out of it comes character and courage and other positive traits associated with independent genetics that associate. So that was in June 1938. But of course, when we 6 siblings were growing up, we were not informed about my mom's origins. The paternal side was sought out. We knew about the origins there. But I had a curiosity about where my genes originated from with that mixed ancestry. So, well into my 40s, and with the help of Glynis, my wife, we managed to track down an old lady living in Stanroa House, which is a frail care facility in Randalls Road in Sydney. I think it's still there now. When Glynis found out that there was this lady called Gloria Witcher living there, when I finished work, I immediately raced, even without her, to this place. And I got there, and it was a winter's night, and I knocked on the door, and an elderly colored woman opened the door and said, "Well, I'm the person that looks after this facility." And I said, please, I know it's dark, I know you don't know me, but I gave her my credentials, and she was curious, and I said, "Do you have a Gloria Witcher living here?" a 92-year-old Gloria Witcher? She said, yes, she lives here. She said, who are you? And I said, well, I may just be the grandson of Gloria's sister Monica. And this lady looked at me, and there was a wrought iron gate guarding that facility, as most frail care facilities are. And she held this wrought iron gate, and she almost got dizzy. And I said, ma'am, are you okay? And she said, yes, I'm okay. I said, but you look pale. She said, well, the reason why I look pale was that because Monica, if you say that was your grandmother, was 2 years above me in class. And she must have beheld me thereafter holding the wrought iron gate because I got dizzy. I was breathless with excitement. Anyway, she led me into this facility, and she led me to what I will call Granny Gloria's room. And it was the first time that I saw a living ancestor of my maternal lineage beyond my mum. And so Granny Gloria welcomed me and said to me she was Monica's sister, and the matron came in as well, and they regaled stories of her living in Pietermaritzburg in primary school. And the story that I got was that Monica Witcher was a genius. Monica's father, which is my great-grandfather, was a man called Frederick Witcher, an Englishman who hailed from Southampton in England. I managed to see Frederick Witcher's identity card and his picture. He's a dapper man. And Granny Gloria showed me that was her father. Needless to say, I was completely flummoxed for this entire thing. And they regaled me stories of Monica's working in the Witcher bakery, because Frederick Witcher, my great-grandfather, had a bakery in Pietermaritzburg. And Granny Gloria and the matron said to me, my grandmother was a genius because she would work in the bakery, hardly ever study, but always top the grade. And so that was the first time well into my 40s that I found out that I was the son of a hybrid. And this yearning to find out my origins ceased then, and I actually felt a sense of peace in myself, because now I knew exactly where all my genes came from. So, needless to say, we in the South Africa that we lived then and now, people of mixed ancestry had difficulties with discrimination, and it was no different with my mom. She had a very difficult childhood, and suffice it to say that she has had no recollection of her mother. The circumstances of that are unbeknown to us 6 siblings, but her mother was removed from her. And suffice it to say that it was a very difficult childhood with no formal parenting, that was something that was very difficult for all 6 of us to grasp, because my mother tended to suppress it away. Anyway, if you fast forward, we lived in Merebank, as you know, and our home was actually what I would call a cultural oasis, because my father was a musician, and we have a garage there, and I'm jumping the gun now. We lived in Clarewood first, Padmini and myself and a few of the other siblings, but just to give you an example, there was sounds wafting from the garage of the Lingam Orchestra practicing, and it was always a sort of a vibrant type of atmosphere. But to take you back to Clarewood, where we lived first, my father also had his music going on there. And one remembers one's life by events. My father had a fond habit of buying a newspaper, although we were very poor. He bought the newspaper, and when there were events, he would point out famous events. So I can remember Richard Nixon. Well, that came much later, but I, for instance, can remember Richard Nixon being, the Watergate scandal being taken out of the White House. I can remember England winning the World Cup in 1966. I can remember the student riot in Paris, because my father pointed out those things. And the one very famous event that I remember was Robert Kennedy being shot, because that occurred on my mother's birthday, 6th of June, 1968. I was 9 years old, and we were living in Clarewood then. And my father came home with the newspaper and said to my mother, Lullie, look at this. This is President Kennedy's brother has just been shot in this Ambassador Hotel on a campaign trail, etc. It was 6 June 1938. And I remember the dish that was prepared there. My mother made a dish of dal, as we know it, dal, and she spruced it up with moringa leaves, and she had a fond habit of using butter, which I often remonstrated her against because of the salt and the fat content. But anyway, she had that there, and I can still remember we had a coal stove. Robert Kennedy's photo was there. My father was discussing this. I can still remember that dish. And what my mother lacked in material resources, she had in creativity. because she could turn a simple dish into something astounding, and that's a legendary tray of her. I'll give you another example. When I was studying in high school and then went on to university, we were very poor, so we couldn't afford, the niceties. And my mother went to what's called a two-door shop in Clearwood. It was literally called Two Doors because it had two doors. It wasn't TUDOR, but two doors. And she bought a length of felt, industrial waste. I still remember the color. It was bottle green, and she sewed me a gown with the straps because she knew that I would be sitting through the night in matric, first year varsity, right up to 6 years of varsity. She knew that the nights were cold, and so she made me this gown, and I wore this gown throughout my time at medical university from grade 10 to final year in medicine, and I treasured that gown for a while because it was a symbol of her creativity amongst very difficult circumstances and very little resources. When my colleagues, other doctors in my group, heard that my mom passed on, obviously tons of messages came through. But Dr. Govender from Cape Town would remember this because he came home in our humble abode there, and we had to dissect a rat as part of our practicals in first year in medical school. And we had this rat dissected out with pins on it and diagrams of the arteries, etc. And we had finished about midnight or so, and we had this rat on a cork board, and we had to obviously preserve the rat, and we put the rat on the bottom rung of the refrigerator. And my mom got up the next morning, and we had floor beds then, by the way, because there was myself and I think Dr. Govender laid out a floor bed for exams the next morning, got up, had a poultry breakfast, and got off to university. At that stage, the first year campus was at Wentworth. And my mother was horrified when she saw this rat there, but thankfully she didn't use the creativity with the butter and salt and make a dish out of that. Subsequently, times moved on, and the famous family gatherings were at Diwali time, because as you know, my family is spread around locally, cities and overseas, and Diwali was a great time for family reunion. But the one hallmark I remember about the Diwali dinners and meals was that my mother always inquired about whether our stomachs were full. She will not sit down at the table until we had been fed and until all the niceties were laid down on the table there, and she would sit last. This was a characteristic of her. My mom also had a fascinating curiosity when all 6 kids were out of the house and she had time on her hands. She was a very curious person. She read avidly, including English literature and of course Hindu literature. And when she got into Nazareth House on day 2, it was in mid-March, one of the nuns or the nurses said to me, "Doctor, do you know," she came to me very subserviently, said, "I hate to make this request, I know you're in a hurry, but your mom asked me whether you wouldn't mind getting a subscription of the Daily News or Mercury for her." And this was just 6 weeks ago. So my mother was curious. And on day 4, when I visited my mother, another nurse said to me, "Doctor, do you know what your mother told me?" She said to me, "Why isn't there CNN or Al Jazeera on these channels here? You've got quite a few limited channels here." Such was my mother's curiosity for knowledge going forward. The one other trait that I found in the last weeks or months of my mother's life was that what came to the fore was that she had a quiet strength about her. In her suffering with this disease that wrecked her with pain and wrecked her with other inconveniences, although she struggled to make simple things work, like for instance getting the bottle of Vicks to her, or getting the little assistant switch to turn on the nurses to come to her, although she struggled with these simple tasks, she never complained. And in the midst of that struggling with those simple tasks, she would inquire for me, "Oh, by the way, how is Nile," that's the grandson, Humiliana, my son, "how is Nile doing?" Or, "How is Inyavan," her great-grandson, my grandson? Or, "I haven't spoken to Pramon for a few days," that's her granddaughter, "how is she doing?" In the midst of her struggling, in the midst of her trying to get tea or trying to get the bottle of Vicks or trying to get this massage ointment, she would not forget to ask about the welfare of others. And that struck me about my mom, a person who put her shoulder to the wheel, had quiet strength and moved on. I suppose when all the phone calls stop, when all the messages stop, and when all the visiting stops, and when you get quiet time, and I think that's the time, will be the first time that I think I will feel the void when this whole saga dies down. As a son, being called to speak or electing to speak here, it's a very difficult task as to what to portray when you're giving a speech about your own mother. And I'm sure other speakers that will come here will give you different perspectives of her. But in leaving this microphone now, I just want to get back to the Gregor Mendel story. I can stand here and say those principles that he ensconced there about the independent association and the genes coming down and the hybrid variety and all of that laws that still hold true today. I just want to proudly stand here and say that, Mom, I stand here extremely proud being the son of a hybrid. Thank you.
Thanks, Raj. We are all proud to be children of our mum, who had a very difficult childhood but always lived her life with dignity. My mum's youngest brother lives in Cape Town, Uncle Ambi, married to Auntie Joan, and she loved them dearly. They always spent a lot of time on the phone with each other, and their son Sven as well, dearly loved by my mum. They send sincere condolences to all of our families on the passing of our beloved sister, grandmother, and great-grandmother. They say, a beautiful woman full of grace and love, always welcomed us, even if it was just to pop in, sharing a catch-up over a cup of tea. We will miss her. May Lord Shiva grant her strength, peace, and love. May her dear soul rest in peace. Love always, Ambi, Joan, and Sven. Swami Sivananda, in his poem Ode to Death, reflects, O death, O Lord Yama, goodbye unto thee. Thou art administering laws of Ishvara. All fall prey to thee. All come into thy jaws. Thou art time. Thou art Dharmaraja, O omniscient Kala. Thou art dispenser of the law. Thou art acquainted with the 3 periods of time. Thou once initiated Natiketas into the mysteries of Atman and Brahman. I have transcended time and death. I am eternity. Where is time in eternity? Time is a mental creation. I have transcended mind. I am not afraid of death. I am beyond thy reach now. I bid thee farewell now. I am grateful for all thy kind acts. Salutations unto thee, O Lord Yama.
Thank you, our dear brother Ravi. Lulliethangi Amma, Amma என்றழைக்கது ஒளியில்லை, அம்மா வணங்காத ஒளியில்லை, அம்மா என்றழைக்கது ஒளியில்லை, அம்மா வணங்காத ஒளியில்லை. பெற்ற தாயின் அம்மா அம்மா வணங்காத உயிரில்லையே. அபிராமி சிவகாமி கருமாரி மகமாய் இருப்பவள் தேவிங்கள் நீதான் அம்மா. அன்றைக்கு அன்னதிய அபிஷேகம் அழகர் உருகினதில் தொன்றும் நான் தான் அம்மா. பொருளோடு புகழ் வென்றும் மகள தாயே அருளேறு இருக்கின்ற அறிவோதுமான் அதி திங்கும் பிரி கொள்கை அமைத்தாடு நான் உன் மகராஜ பிரிகின்ற வரவேணுவான் அது அம்மா என்றழைக்காதே உயிரில்லையே. அம்மாவை வணங்காதே உயிரில்லை. தங்கும் பொது வெள்ளி மாணிக்கம் மணிவை அறியாவும் பொருளையீரகுமான் வெளி நீதி வெளி வைத்து கேட்டனும் பொருள் கடிதாய தயன்பும் கிரிகருமான் நீ வேணுமாதங்கள் கை மூடிய தாங்கி நீ பட்டும் திரும்ப அறிவேணுமான் நீ வேண்டு கண்மங்கள் தானும் முறுத்தான் உலகின்றி நான் பட்டும் கடிதீருமான் அம்மா என்றழைத்தால் உயிரில்லையே. அம்மாவை வணங்காத உயிரில்லை. அம்மா அம்மம்மா லலிதாங்கி அம்மா. ஹரி ஓம். திருச்சம்பரம். மந்திரம் பாண்டவர் மேலது நீரு மந்திரவருணீரே பாண்டவர் மேலது நீரு மந்திர மாவது நீரு பாண்டவர் மேலது நீரு சுந்தரமாவதும் நீரு சுந்தரமாவதும் நீரு துடிக்கப்படுவதும் நீரு சந்திரமாவதும் நீரு சமீகத்தில் உள்ளதும் நீரு சந்திரமாவதும் நீரு சமீகத்தில் உள்ளதும் நீரு செல்லுவர் வாயுமே பங்கு செல்லுவர் வாயுமே பங்கு திருவானவையான் திருநீரு ஆற்று நடல் வீடைய ஆழவையான் திருநீட்டு ஆற்று நடல் வீடைய ஆழவையான் திருநீட்டு ஓட்ட புகழிலாவும் ஓட்ட புகழிலாவும்
Thank you so much, Nancy. Stirring rendition of Mandiram Avadaniru. My mother would have loved that. I want to introduce to you Lulliethangi Moodley. Lullie was the apple of my mom's eyes. She spent a lot of time with Lullie, which is Raj's son. Raj had a lot of overseas trips to do, and our house was on the way to the airport very conveniently. We would leave the kids very often, fly off to Cape Town, fly off here and there with the Glynis. And Lullie and Pramod would spend hours and hours with Mama, and she loved him dearly. Lullie, can I call upon you to say a few words, Mama?
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for coming. I have to be honest, it's a strange feeling being up here. I got asked to do this speech. Of course I said yes, honored to speak. You write out a rough sketch of what you're going to say, you practice it in the mirror and in the shower, and then you get up here, and the gravity of what has happened and what is happening kind of hits you. So it feels a bit different. But much like the amazing moment you were here to eulogize, I'm going to do my best regardless. When I was trying to plan what to say, initially I struggled. There were so many things that I wanted to try and cram in, different stories and lessons and jokes and things. But what I thought I would end up doing most pertinently, especially for me from my perspective, is to reference the last conversation that I had with her in person at Nazareth House, one-on-one in her room. Maybe a good 15 or 20 minutes or so, just her and I, no real agenda or anything, of course, just a conversation. The implication hung heavily in the air. Of course, I didn't say it directly, but that it was to be the last in-person conversation, so it is especially meaningful. A lot of that will end up always being just for me. It was a one-on-one conversation. It had, of course, that feeling to it. But what I'd like to do is to touch on some parts of that conversation that I think frame her the best possible way and kind of contextualize the most important parts. Firstly, my own direct relationship with her was amazing. She has, again, many amazing qualities that would have turned this speech into a lecture. If I had touched on all of them, I could have really gone on and on. But the two things that stood out to me most, that were my favorite things about her, were her toughness and her curiosity. Her curiosity about anything and everything, really. People, events, happenings. I especially, of course, the relationship between the grandmother and the grandson, I loved her in that aspect, but specifically this type of person, where any conversation with him is just the best type of back and forth. If you know more, they'll listen. If she knows more, which was most of the time, of course, then I would listen. We were on the same footing. It felt like I was talking to a colleague. And that is a very, very rare skill, especially in people that are much, much older, when there's a big age gap. She found everything interesting, which I absolutely love. People. The stories of not just her own upbringing, which was difficult, but specifically of my aunts and uncles and my father, about world events, about sport and politics and science and technology. I absolutely loved speaking to her. I could speak to her truly about anything, and I absolutely loved it. Also, specifically her toughness. She didn't have the easiest situation or the easiest circumstances a lot of the time, but she really did make the best of it. She had a lot of difficult things happen to her, but she really did thrive in the end. It taught me to look to the challenges in my own life, the difficult things that arise in my own life, as opportunities for learning and growth, which is a very underrated lesson, in my opinion, to take difficulty and turn it into a positive experience. And somehow, even truthfully, she faced far more difficult things than I happily ever had to. She taught me so much about resilience and being upstanding through difficult times. Secondly, the second thing of that conversation that I'd like to quickly touch on is her children. She really, really loved you guys, my dear aunts and uncles. She spoke about each of you with such distinct pride during that conversation. It was absolutely amazing to hear. She loved each of you so dearly. She was so happy that each of you had a good relationship with each other, but still had that independent spirit that she had to go and make plentiful and bountiful lives of your own, while still retaining your own DNA, but leaning on each other when you had to. She, of course, in one-on-one conversations between each of you, you'd know better, but the sense that I got was that she was extremely, extremely proud and happy for all of you. Specifically, apart from my own direct relationship with her one-on-one, which was amazing and which I will really miss, my own direct blood link is, of course, with my own father. She was so proud of you. You've achieved so much in your life and in your career. They say in social science that toughness and grit is partially personality based and partially genetic. I see it. I see that part of her in you, Dad. She spoke of you again in that conversation. I couldn't believe it. We spoke about you briefly, and she sort of spoke back over your career and your achievements, specifically in your career, not your two amazing kids. But her toughness and her grit definitely passed down to you, as did her curiosity, her intellectual curiosity. It reflects in everything you do in your entire career, how you deal with family and friends, how you deal with patients, how you even deal with your kids and yourself. It is her way of leaving a thumbprint in your life, which by extension led through into my life, because of course you're directly related to me. My way to try and honor her is by honoring you by extension. She would have wanted the best for you as a son, and part of wanting the best for your son is that if he ends up having kids, which you did, that they turn out to be the best versions of themselves for you. In her honor and yours, I think I'm doing okay, but I hope to do even better in the future, to honor not just you, but her by extension. Lastly, before I close, I'd like to speak to her directly for the last time in person. Aya, your journey through life's garden wasn't always easy. There was rocky soil, there were thorns and difficult weather, bad quality fertilizer and bad seeds, but you made the garden grow anyway. You took 6 amazing seeds and you planted them. They recommended 6 inches apart, close enough to survive off each other, but far enough apart to be independent. The green thumbs of the gardener reflect in all 6 of their lives. They've lived remarkable lives thus far and will continue to do so. They've gone on to have saplings, you could say, not just 1 generation but 2. There's an entire crowd of us now that have the same mandate that you had, to teach themselves and the generations below them, not just to take advantage of bountiful harvest when the weather is fair, but to thrive during the bitter frosts of life's winters. We all have now, I think, the same directive, to live our lives in the best way we can, to honor your handiwork. To paraphrase probably my favorite saying of yours, don't worry, we'll be just fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Nile. I guess by now you should know enough about loss to realize that you never really stop missing someone. You just learn to live around the huge gaping gap that they leave in your lives. My mom had 5 great-grandchildren as well, and I want to read a message from Praveen, which is my eldest sister, Padmani's son, living in Helsinki, from Praveen and his wife Larissa and their daughter Vera. We send our deepest condolences and love from afar as you gather to honor Aya. We regret we cannot be there with you. Her strength and unwavering determination were an inspiration. She was a formidable woman, sharp as a tack, and right to the very end. We miss her greatly, with love and sympathy from Praveen, Larissa, and Vera Governor. We spent quite a bit of time away from South Africa, myself and my wife, Myra, and our 2 boys. And I think because of that, we communicated with Mom very often, and more often than we would normally do while we were in South Africa. And we became quite close, and she shared many intimate details and stories about her childhood, and my mother loved to laugh. And we often spoke about this day, when this day would come, and how she would approach it. And my sense was that, yes, she understood that there would be grief, but there should also be a celebration of her life and what she achieved and left behind. She was close to my sons. We live in the United States, as you know, and they're not able to be here. They flew down last year and spent a month with my mom and shared the many stories with her as well. So these are from my boys, Sagan and Vivian. I don't know where to begin when it comes to talking about my grandmother. She was one of the kindest, most caring, and most loving people I've ever known. She had a unique sense of humor that made people gravitate towards her, making you laugh without even trying. She worked so hard to make sure everyone in the family was fed, cared for, and comfortable. Even when you didn't need to, even when she didn't need to anymore, she kept working. She just kept on working, out of love and out of habit and out of sheer strength. We used to scold her for not resting. But that was just who she was. Someone who wouldn't stop working because she just couldn't stop giving. She was incredibly intelligent. Despite the years between us, we could talk for hours. Her insight and her perspective always amazed me. She taught me so much without even realizing it. I love her so much, and I'm going to miss her every day she's not here with us. But I will do everything I can to make her proud and keep her memory and presence with me and my brother. That's from my boys. Thank you everyone for your patience through these ceremonies. Nelson, would you guide us through another Teva room? Thank you. These are two of Ama's favorite songs that Nelson is now going to sing. One of them, the second one, Yepperi Party, is probably one of our all-time favorites.
One of our great 63 favorite saints, Ammiye Nappa Oppila Maniye, coinciding with the Yepperi Party, which is Ama's two favorite hymns, ladies and gentlemen. Ammiyappa Oppila Maniye, Ammiyanappa Oppila Maniye, Anbidal Vilande Namage, Oiniye Piragum, Oiniye Piragum, Urettari Suragum, Urettari Pulayan, Tanake Semmiye Shiva Padumalite, Selvame Shiva Perumani, Inmaye Unnaye Sikkine Pinite, Engu Arumanum Iniye Yepperi Padinaru, Yepperi Padinaru, Yepperi Padinaru, Adiya Yepperi Padinaru, Adiya Yepperi Padinaru, Azikunde Jivane Yepperi Padinaru, Adiya Yepperi Padinaru, Azikunde Jivane Yepperi Padinaru. Apparum sundarum Apparum sundarum Adudapalayum, Apparum sundarum Adudapalayum, Apparum sundarum Adudapalayum, Arumarivasaganum Purunade Unnage, Arumarivasaganum Purunade Unnage, Yepperi Padinaru, Adiya Yepperi Padinaru, Azikunde Jivane Yepperi Padinaru. குருமணி சங்கரரும் அருமை தாய் மகனும் குருமணி சங்கரரும் அருமை தாய் மகனும் குருமணி சங்கரரும் அருமை தாய் மகனும் அருணகிரிநாதரும் மருளோடி வல்லனும் அருணகிரிநாதரும் மருளோடி வல்லனும் கருணை கடல் பெருமி கருணை கடல் பெருமி காதலி கடல் பெருமி காதலியமுகி கருணை கடல் பெருமி காதலியமுகி கருத்தம் சொல்லின கருதிலே கருதினமும் எப்படி பாடினரும் அடியாரப்படி பாடினார் ஆசிக்குண்டே ஜீவனே எப்படி பாடினரும் எப்படி பாடினரும் எப்படி பாடினரும் அறிவோம் திருவிற்றம்பலம் அறிவோம் உன்னருள் புகழ்ந்த பணியும் நீலகண்டு நடராஜா நடராஜ பெருமானே தீன கருணாகரணி நடராஜா நீலகண்டனே தீன கருணாகரணி நடராஜா நீலகண்டனே தீன கருணாகரணி நடராஜா நீலகண்டனே தீன கருணாகரணி நடராஜா நீலகண்டனே உன்னருள் புகழ்ந்த பணியும் உன்னருள் புகழ்ந்த பணியும் என்னை திரும்பும் மரணும் உன்னருள் புகழ்ந்த பணியும் என்னையும் திரும்பும் மரணும் மனம் இருந்து நிலகண்டனே ஞானிகள் மனம் இருந்து நிலகண்டனே மௌன குருவே மௌன குருவே மௌன குருவே மௌன குருவே அரணி கணியாண்டா நிலகண்டனே மௌன குருவே அரணி கணியாண்டா நிலகண்டனே நீலகருணாகரணி நடராஜா நீலகண்டனே மீனலோகனி மனால நடராஜ நடராஜ பெருமானே மீனலோகனி மனால தலவு மனசபபத்து மீனலோகனி மனால தலவு மனசபபத்து ஞானிகள் மனம் இருந்து நிலகண்டனே ஞானிகள் மனம் இருந்து நிலகண்டனே மௌன குருவே மௌன குருவே மௌன குருவே மௌன குருவே அரணி அணியாண்டா நிலகண்டனே மௌன குருவே அரணி அணியாண்டா நிலகண்டனே நீலகருணாகரணி நடராஜா நீலகண்டனே ஆத்யந்தமெல்லாம் அருளி அன்பரோடு வாழும் பரணி ஆத்யந்தமெல்லாம் அருளி அன்பரோடு வாழும் பரணி ஆதிமதினே நீனே பரமேசா நீலகண்டனே ஆதிமதினே நீனே பரமேசா நீலகண்டனே மௌன குருவே மௌன குருவே மௌன குருவே மௌன குருவே நீ அணியாண்டா நீலகண்டனே மௌன குருவே நீ அணியாண்டா நீலகண்டனே நீலகருணாதனே நகராஜா நீலகண்டனே 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 திருச்சிற்றம்பலம் அருஜோதி தீபம் என்னே அன்று கொண்ட தீபம் அருஜோதி தீபம் என்னே ஆண்டு கொண்ட தீபம் அம்பலத்தில் அடுகின்ற ஆனந்த தீபம் அம்பலத்தில் அடுகின்ற ஆனந்த தீபம் ஒரு நாளும் அருகில் எல்லாம் ஊற்றுகின்ற தீபம் ஒரு நாளும் அருகில் எல்லாம் ஊற்றுகின்ற தீபம் ஓதான தீபமோய ஆதான தீபம் ஓதான தீபமோய நாதான தீபம் இருவாழும் நீதி மோதி என்னும் தெய்வம் இருவாழும் நீதி மோதி என்னும் தெய்வம் எண்ணிய எமகருளும் தெய்வம் எண்ணிய எமகருளும் தெய்வம் பெருமாளையும் சிவமானும் தெய்வம் பெருமாளையும் சிவமானும் தெய்வம் செத்தமயல் விலகுகின்ற தெய்வமான தெய்வம் செத்தமயல் விலகுகின்ற தெய்வமான தெய்வம் எல்லாருக்கு வல்ல தெய்வம் எங்கூரில் தெய்வம் எல்லாருக்கு வல்ல தெய்வம் எங்கூரில் தெய்வம் என்னுயரை கலந்தே என்பன் நலகும் தெய்வம் கல்லாருக்கும் நல்ல தெய்வம் கருவான தெய்வம் நச்சவையில் நாடுகின்ற நடராஜ தெய்வம் நச்சவையில் நாடுகின்ற நடராஜ தெய்வம் கல்லார்க்கும் காற்றவரும் கலிவரும் தெய்வம் காரணம தெய்வமருள் பூரணம தெய்வம் செல்லாத தெய்வங்கள் எல்லாம் செல்லுகின்ற தெய்வம் செத்தவர்கள் விலகுகின்ற தெய்வமான தெய்வம் செத்தவர்கள் விலகுகின்ற தெய்வமான தெய்வம் அருள்ஜோதி ஆண்டு கொண்ட தெய்வம் அம்பலத்தில் ஆடுகின்ற ஆனந்த தெய்வம் அம்பலத்தில் ஆடுகின்ற ஆனந்த தெய்வம்
Thank you so much. In this fast-paced life that we lead these days, funerals are often the place where we get to see people that we haven't seen in such a long time, and often ends up as an excitement as well. Don't be afraid to express that. My mother would have enjoyed that. It is a celebration of her legacy, absolutely. And it's unfortunate that at times that you only get to see folks at funerals or at the crematorium. It's okay to be excited to see each other. Feel free to express that excitement. My mother loved the profound writers of the world. She really enjoyed Oprah Winfrey, adored her. And when Oprah lost Maya Angelou, a great poet, she said, "Without the density of her body, I can better feel the intensity of her spirit. I feel stronger, more awake and more alive and ready to carry on her legacy." Very similar to what Neele said earlier on. My mom had 6 children, and Shamla is my second eldest sister. Moved to Johannesburg quite a long time ago, but stayed very close to my mom, always calling and making sure she was well taken care of. Sham, would you please come and express your reflections of Amma as well?
Good morning, everyone. Clearly not as tall as my brothers or my nephew. In making the decision to talk today, very difficult one, I had to put paying tribute to my mum above the way I feel. It's obviously been a very difficult time for us all. Our mum lived a full and extraordinary life, despite very difficult start, as you've heard my brother mention. She put in more than 100% effort into everything she did, not the least of which was building our family into the formidable one it is today. She was determined to educate and enrich herself through extensive reading, some of which you've heard about already, especially after all of us had left home and she had more time on her hands. Her reading covered a wide range of genres: history, politics, especially in our country, life after death, religion, cooking, gardening, drama, adventure stories. She had books from my nieces and nephews. I would lend her books that I read, and when I asked if she'd enjoy them, she'd exclaim with delight and say she couldn't wait to finish her housework and her cooking so she could resume her reading and get lost in the magical world of books. She was reading up to Easter Monday last week when I wheeled her out into the sunshine around Nazareth House. As you heard before, she loved the gardens, flowers, and she took in all that in her last days. We always stuck a book, newspaper in the back of the wheelchair because we knew she would need it when we went out. She also read all the weekly newspapers from cover to cover, often disrupting the page order to the extent that the next reader would have to rearrange the pages first before reading it. Newspapers would be spread all over the house. She also watched all the news bulletins on TV, much to the chagrin of some of our family members, because they came to spend time with her, and listened to the local news on her radio in the kitchen while she was cooking. And you couldn't phone her. You should know not to phone her at certain times because she was listening to things on the radio. Up to her last days, when my sister and I were spending an extensive amount of time with her, she would say, "What day is it?" She would know what was on Radio Lotus that night. And before we left, we would put the radio on for her to listen to her programs. Amma was well known as one of the best cooks of her generation. Probably less well known for her baking. She was creative, she was innovative with amazing results. On her fridge was a magnet which said Grandma's Kitchen, made to order. And the grandchildren made very good use of it. It is so fitting that our Amma is being laid to rest on this Freedom Day, a significant milestone in the liberation of our country, when all of us could vote in the first democratic elections. She was a great fan of Madiba and had a picture of him prominently displayed in her TV room. Today signifies Freedom Day in our country, and her freedom from this earthly domain, as our religion teaches us, and especially her suffering in the past year. We are all so pleased that Amma is being laid to rest the day after Pope Francis, an auspicious time by anyone's measure. Together with our dad, the late Jack Moodley, who left us far too soon, our parents built a family and a legacy from virtually nothing. We are two lost souls who found each other and created this family, and I think we number 27 today at my last count. And the youngest one is saying hello in the back there. Our Amma was both mum and dad for the last 33 years since our dad's passing. And she reasoned that she remained here on this earthly domain until her mid-80s, as she was our only guardian, guiding light, and wise counsel. She was always searching for meaningful answers to life's most profound questions. Although we are relieved our Amma is at peace now, and we miss her dearly, and always will, we feel her significant presence in our lives still. Rest in peace, Ma. You have more than earned it. The indignity of this disease and what it robbed you of. Life is sometimes unfair. I want to end with a phrase Shakespeare wrote to describe Queen Cleopatra, which I think is very fitting of my mum. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety.
Thank you, Sham. I want to reflect a little on my mum's relationship with all the ladies in the family with respect to the baking and cooking. And she was a queen of her kitchen and always took command. She had the ability to conjure up the most fantastic meals, and she had some special recipes which she never shared. She never wrote them down, and she never shared her secrets. And my wife is a baker of note. I call her Cake Boss. And she tried to get some of these recipes from her over these last few years, and eventually extracted a few of those recipes. But what my wife really found out at the end was that there was no real recipe that she followed. She just cooked from the heart most of the time. What she felt was ready on that day, she just put into that baking and created it with a lot of love. And that was my mom. Cooking and baking from the heart. She also had a very special relationship with people that came along selling vegetables and walking miles and miles every day to carry vegetables from Amkumas and all of those places in the south coast, selling nuts. And she would argue with them on price and barter with them, but she would always make sure she left them with a plate of food and was very giving. She was very popular with the the helpers and domestic workers in our district. Supremely popular. She gave most of what she had to them. And for years and years, they came along to say hello to my mom. Even sometimes when they were not selling things. So she had a very special relationship with people that worked, the working class of people in our district. My mother was part of a Sangam, and one of the Sangam ladies would love to share the message of love that they shared this morning at the Sangam. Won't you please join me in sharing that message of love?
Vanakkam everyone. Actually, I'm Guru Segri from the Sangamir Bank branch, and today here we lies the body of Amma Lullie in this casket, which one day we all will be there. As I've learned today so much about Amma Lullie, much more than we knew her in the Sangam. Very bold, as I told her son, that is a very strong iron lady, I would call it. She's always wanting things to be above board. She always used to ask me, and tell me, do this, do it this way. She'd like to correct you. I'm so proud of her, knowing her, and I'm so proud of knowing how she brought up her children. And today I would like to be like her, to be so strong and bold and so courageous. Today's sermon, as we all know, we don't know our mother tongue, Tamil. So sometimes it's nice to say the meaning of in English, and I will sing that song on love. Anbun sivam sivamel anbun. God is love and love is God. The song entitled Anbe Vadivine in Dry Poetry. The meaning of the song, I will say the meaning of love on this song. They say, Anbe Vadivine in Dry Poetry. Praise the Lord, who is the very form of love. Praise the Lord, who removes the sorrows of his devotee. Amma was a true devotee of Lord Shiva and a true mother. Praise the Lord, the giver of joy and our soul protector. Praise God, who is the form of joy. It's more about love. Praise God, who is both mother and father. Praise to you, for you are life and wealth. So, Om Tirusutrambalam Anbe Vadivine in Rai Potri Anbatuyathaniti Pai Potri Anbe Vadivine in Rai Potri Anbatuyathaniti Pai Potri Inbami Tandu Ka Pai Potri Inba Vadivine Kadavuli Potri Inba Mitandu Ka Pai Potri Inba Vadivine Kadavuli Potri Dayam Tandiyum Ni Potri அன்பியும் நீயே போற்றி அன்பே வடிவாய் நின்றாய் போற்றி அன்பே வடிவாய் நின்றாய் போற்றி அன்பு துய தனி தீபாய் போற்றி அன்பே வடிவாய் நின்றாய் போற்றி அன்பு துய தனி தீபாய் போற்றி மன்னு வெண்ணிலானியே போற்றி கண்ணுளாடுமேன் கடவுளை போற்றி அன்பே வடிவாய் நின்றாய் போற்றி அன்பே வடிவனை கடவுளை போற்றி முதலே போற்றி மூவாய் போற்றி ஒருவே போற்றி ஒருவாய் போற்றி அன்பே வடிவாய் நின்றாய் போற்றி அன்பு துய தனி தீபாய் போற்றி அன்பே வடிவாய் நின்றாய் போற்றி அன்பு துய தனி தீபாய் போற்றி ஓம் நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய ஓம் நம சிவாய ஓம் திருச்சிற்றம்பலம். தேங்க்யூ. நன்றி.
பெற்றதாய் தந்தை மகமருந்த பிள்ளை பிரிந்த மருந்த உயிர் மருந்த உயிர் மேலே முகமருந்த மருந்தாலும் நத்தவத்தவர் உள்ளிருத்தவும் நமசிவாயத்தினான் மரவே நமசிவாயத்தினான் மரவே துன்பும் யாரது தும்பி இன்னும் சேர்க்க மாட்டாய துன்பும் யாரது தும்பி இன்னும் சேர்க்க மாட்டாய எமக்கின்னும் சேர்க்க மாட்டாய துன்பும் யாரது தும்பி இன்பம் சேர்க்க மாட்டாய எமக்கின்றும் சேர்க்க மாட்டாய அன்பிலானுக்கு தமிழை பாடினி அன்பிலானுக்கு தமிழை பாடினி அல்லலுக்கு மாட்டாய அன்பிலானுக்கு தமிழை பாடினி அல்லலுக்கு மாட்டாய கண்ணே அல்லலுக்கு மாட்டாய துன்பம் நேர்கள் யாரது தம்பி இன்பம் சேர்க்க மாட்டாயா என்மகென்றும் சேர்க்க மாட்டாயா கண்ணீர் அடிமை என்றும் நான் மனிமை என்றுமே அருகிலாத போது அருமை என்றும் நான் மனிமை என்றுமே அருகிலாத போது நாம் அருகிலாத போது அன்பின தமிழ் கூட்டு மொழியினா யாரு காட்ட மாட்டாயா ஆதி காட்ட மாட்டாயா அருமிரென்றும் மருமிரென்றுமே அருகிலாத போது தமிழ் இறைவனாலில் கஜம் தனம் தனம் ததுபதி மிகனும் இரவமரித கஜம் தனம் தனம் ததுபதி மிகனும் இரவமகன் நகுதனிதம் ஒருமிரென்றும் அகிமிரென்றும் புலவு கண்ட நூறு ஒருமிரென்றும் அருமிரென்றுமே புலவு கண்ட நூறு புறவி கண்ட நூறு தமிழ் புலவி கண்ட இரவியாக துன்பம் யாரு துணி இன்பம் சேர்க்க மாட்டாயா நாம் மீதான மாட்டாயா Ladies and gentlemen, I'm doing the next hymn on Monica Vasco, one of our greatest saints, one of the 63 Savai saints. He created this hymn thousands and thousands of years ago, ladies and gentlemen, and he says it very, very clear. It is from the Sutta Puranam. says, Namachivaya Varga, Nathan Talvarga, Inipurudu, Yenangel, Ningatan Talvarga, Easanari Potri, Endanari Potri, Desanari Potri, Shivinchevari Potri, Maya Piriviki, Mananari Potri. I can go on 108 verses. But one of the verses he says very clearly, he says, Pullagi, Puvagi, Puruvagi, Maramagi, Palvirigamagi, Parivayagi, Pambagi, Kallagi, Manidaragi, Peyai, Kalangaragi, Ballasuraragi, Munivaragi, Devaragi. Simply means it in German, we on this Mother Pumadevi. We talk about the Atma, we talk about the life all the time. The Atma and the life belong to Lord Namah Shivaya. He says you can take it at any time, whether you're stillborn, 10 years old, 50, 100, 150 years. We have to go back to our Maker, the Almighty Lord Namah Shivaya. And he says in this stanza, he says he did not only give the human beings life, he gave the animals life, he gave the insects life. Pambagi, he gave the snake's life. Peyagi, he even gave the demon life. And he talks about Kallagi. Kalla, stone, Tamil is Kalla, stone, granite, Karankal. You'll find them in all the temples. Eternal life. That's where we get bhakti from. So, ladies and gentlemen, on this earth, we must do good, be good. Do not hurt others because we don't have the right to do so. Do not take away the happiness of others. We don't have the right to do so. Live in humanity, live in divinity, togetherness. In our culture, Anadaram is most important. May God forgive you. We get back 10 times. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm doing this lovely hymn. Lord Namah Shivaya, Varga Nathan Talvarga. Tirujatrambalam, Namah Shivaya, Varga Nathan Talvarga. Namah Shivaya, Varga Nathan Talvarga. Ivi Purudum Yenangel, Ningatan Talvarga. Ogaliyaga, Gurumani Talvarga. Agumumagi, Anipa Talvarga. Yegan, Irevenariyaga. Namah Shivaya, Varga Nathan Talvarga. Ivi Purudum Yenangel, Ningatan Talvarga. Vegum Kadutande Vedam Adimulga Pirapadakum Pinjagandan Vekaranaga Vegum Kadutande Vedam Adimulga Pirapadakum Pinjagandan Vekaranaga Uratani Siyunda Pookanangal Karanguiva Magilum Pookanangal Siripuivan Ulmagilum Chirokananga Namah Shivaya, Varga Nathan Talvarga. Ivi Purudum Yenangel, Ningatan Talvarga. Easanari Potri, Yenangeli Potri. Easanari Potri, Yenangeli Potri. Desanari Potri, Shivinchevari Potri. Neyatanil, Vimalanari Potri. Maya Pirupalkum, Mananari Potri. Ira Perunduriyam, Devanari Potri. Namah Shivaya, Varga Nathan Talvarga. Ivi Purudum Yenangel, Ningatan Talvarga. Easanari Potri, Yenangeli Potri. Desanari Potri, Shivinchevari Potri. Neyatanil, Vimalanari Potri. Maya Pirupalkum, Mananari Potri. Ira Perunduriyam, தேவனடி போற்றி நம சிவாய வாழ்நாதன் நல்வாழ்வாய் இமை பொருளும் எண்ணெண்கள் நீங்காததாழ்வாய் ஆராதியும் அருளும் மலை போற்றி ஆராதியும் அருளும் மலை போற்றி சிவன் அருள் சென்னையுள் நின்றதன்னா அவன் அருளாலே அவன் தழுகி கந்தமனே சிவபுராணம் கண்ணே முள்ளி விரிமுழுதும் மொயிரு பங்க நம சிவாய மகநாதன் நல்வாழ்வாய் இமை பொருளும் எண்ணெண்கள் நீங்காததாழ்வாய் உள்ளாகி பூவாகி புருவாகி மரமாகி பல்விரகமாகி பல்வியாகி பாம்பாகி உள்ளாகி பூவாகி புருவாகி மரமாகி பல்விரகமாகி பல்வியாகி பாம்பாகி கல்லாகி மனுத்தராகி பேயாய் கல்லுங்கராகி வல்லசுராகி முனிவராகி தேவராய் செல்லானில்லை தேவர சங்கமத்துள் நம சிவாய வாழ்வநாதன் நல்வாழ்வாய் இமை பொருளும் எண்ணெண்கள் நீங்காததாழ்வாய் நம சிவாய நம சிவாய நம சிவாய ஓம் திருச்சிற்றம்பலம்.
Thank you so much for that great rendition of a very special hymn, Namah Shivaya. Grief is the price we pay for our love. Changes shape but really never ends. There's no pain so great as the memory of joy in present grief, and tears really are the silent language of grief. As you greet my family, my brothers and sisters, I wanted to reflect a little on what they've done for my mum. With us not being here close to her, my wife and I don't live in Durban, overseas. It was very difficult for us to really understand what they were going through and do everything by phone and video call. It's been a very difficult last 6 months specifically. And at the last 2 or 3 months, I think I'm comforted by the fact that I've said everything I wanted to say to my mother. I told her how much I thanked her, how thankful I am for her determination, for her courage and what she's given to me and my family, for her trust and for her encouragement all throughout my journey. Told her very clearly that we are supremely thankful for that and that we love her dearly. My wife and my kids said it to her very often, and I did too. So I am very much at peace standing here, knowing that she lived a full life, and comforted that towards the end the pain was too great and it was time for her to leave. Other members of my family grieve in their own way as well, and thank you for being here to share that time with them. The only cure for grief is grief itself. So let us allow that to play out as and when it plays out for each person. My mom was a member of several senior citizens groups, and there was a time I remember when I was in Johannesburg that I needed to book time with her to see her when I used to come down, because there were times that I would come down, she would not be around. She'd be in Wild Coast or some chalet somewhere, and I had to make sure that I synchronized my calendar to be with her. She was always on the move. And one of those senior citizens club was Good Hope Senior Citizens Club. I think there might be a representative here today, Auntie Ambi. I didn't see her earlier. If Auntie Ambi is here, is. Please share your reflections with us.
Good afternoon to all of you. Our condolences to the family and friends of Mrs. Lullie Moodley. Mrs. Lullie Moodley was one of the founder members of Good Hope Senior Citizens Club. And it is a difficult time for all of us as we mourn the passing of a truly wonderful woman. She was a gracious lady with a gentle smile and a heart overflowing with love and compassion. Auntie Lullie, as she was fondly known to all our members, assisted us with the management of the club. She was ever so ready to invite us to her home, whether it was for a committee meeting or a get-together. You would not be allowed to leave her home without sharing a meal with her. When she sponsored a meal for the club, she would choose an healthy meal. A special request would be for fish to be prepared. The cost did not matter to her, as she knew that the seniors loved it. Her advice was always to take good care of our members. Her legacy isn't just in the memories we cherish, but on the positive impact she had made on all of us. She showed us that true strength lies not in power, but in the empathy and understanding. May we find comfort in the memories we shared and honor her spirit by carrying the caring values of kindness and compassion forward. We are indeed thankful to God that He saw fit to bring us all together in this journey called life. Till we meet again, Auntie Lullie, from the executives and members of Good Hope Senior Citizens Club. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the club and to Auntie Ambi as well. My mom wanted that club to grow from strength to strength. She took a lot of strength from it. At some point, she served in the executive of the club as well and did all of this with the Standard 3 education. Can you picture yourself in this day and age going through life with the Standard 3 education? It's incredible what she's achieved. It's incredible what she put together in terms of her legacy. How she managed my dad's meager paycheck, making sure that we had enough on the table. Sometimes borrowing from the next month from the paycheck to make sure that we had clothes and we had food, we had everything we needed. Those were really humble days, and she stayed humble through the rest of her life. In a very special way that made us value what we have today, be it small or be it large. Whatever we carry with ourselves, we always remember the way our parents approached the materiality, the necessity of the materiality of life. And she had a very special way of addressing that as well. To her dying day, she died wealthy from humble beginnings. She was very well looked after at Nazareth House. She had everything she needed, and she didn't think that it would end that way. But when my sister introduced her to that house and she saw the surroundings and the warmth and the love that was there, she summoned her courage once again, left my sister's home, and knew that it was her time to spend the last few months there. And once again, admiration we had for her courage is going to live with us for a very long time. We have a few more renditions of the Thevaram before final thanks and closing prayer. So if you have not had a chance yet to say goodbye to Mom, please do it in the next few minutes. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Hari Om Tiruvitrambaram Uttarayanamaya
Always my least favorite service song, but the way you sing it makes me want to change my mind. We also had many people from the Sangam here this morning. We really want to say a special thanks to the Sangam group. They valued my mother so much. She literally went to Sangam until the point where she couldn't walk. Because she used to walk to Sangam. And sometimes I would pick her up, but she became too weak to go eventually. She quit, but she went until she had the energy to. So thank you to all of you for your blessings. I want to thank all of you for coming today to say farewell to my mom on this holiday weekend too. And several people flew down from Johannesburg, drove great distances. Welcome, thank you so much. Special thank you to my family, my eldest sister, Padmini. I don't think words will describe it enough in terms of what she's been through these last few months, being there for my mom every single day. Thank you, Akka. I can't imagine the sense of loss that you have. You're the eldest child, being with mom all the time, through thick and thin, supporting each other. She spoke of you daily. Whenever I called her and spoke with her, we always wondered about your farewell when you went through, your welfare when you went through difficult times. And it worried her, it stirred her, and I think it brought her closer to you in many ways. Saying thank you for what you did for Amma is almost superfluous, but I wanted to call it that we are eternally grateful for what you've given to her in these last few months specifically, aside from all the other years. Thank you for being selfless. Tim Bhandaran has been really a jack of all trades these last 6 months or so. Tim is the partner of my sister and is new to our family, and we value you so much. The time you spent with my mother became more and more special every single day. Thank you for your blessings, your prayers, and all your running around. It's difficult to just cover it in a couple of minutes, Tim, but we know that every time you saw her, you prayed for her, you prayed with her, and whatever you had, you gave. Your time, your effort, your songs. We really appreciate you. My brothers, mates, Bob and Rajan, special thanks to you, Raj. Having a practice on one side, caring for mom. We're very fortunate to have a doctor in the family to care for mom. It would have been so difficult for us to approach this without that knowledge and deep understanding of the next step. And you guided us through that next step every single time with patience and with consultation, which is so important. I'm sure you always do the best way forward, but you had the good sense to check with us. We appreciate that, especially with me being far away. Having the care, all the right drugs at the right time, and going through chemotherapy and all of that must have been really helpful for you. We appreciate the time. Not just for you, for Iqbal and the practice as well. Please pass on our greatest amount of thanks to you. The rest of the family that supported and visited mom. Mom didn't want very many visitors. You know she was a private person. Some visitors did arrive and she welcomed them. She didn't have the energy and she struggled with the lack of dignity in the final days that this disease brings upon you. So she didn't want that to be public. She preferred that to be private. And if anything, that's what pulled her closer. to engage with people. But to those who arrived at Nazareth House to say goodbye, we are very, very grateful. Thank you for coming. When we used to speak about death and what happens after, in terms of ceremonies and all of that, my mother was never a big fan of fanfare. The pomp and ceremony of somebody's funeral and ceremonies afterwards was not something she was a big supporter of. So she always said when she passes, she must be simple, please keep it simple. If you want to have a ceremony, yeah, you can have a ceremony, but make sure you feed the poor people. In fact, on her 80th birthday, we got an opportunity. We took her to an orphanage and she bought food and presents for all of the kids that would say Monica's up here in Treasure Beach. And she wanted the same kind of thing when she passes as well. So there will not be many big ceremonies and memorial services after today. Will receive something on behalf of my mother in the coming days and weeks. I also want to thank Guru Manogran who carried out Amma's wishes. He visited her in days before she passed. She very specifically wanted him. I wanted to thank you to the musicians as well. What a fine job you did today. Thank you so much, Nelson. Auntie Sheila has been doing flowers in our family for decades. And every time I'm here at MTSS, I see her at some various functions. And once again, she got my mother's favorite color, pink, and you can almost see my mother smiling these flowers. I said to Auntie Sheila this morning that we are very grateful for whatever she's done for my mom over the years. She was very close to my mom. My mom had a great amount of respect for her and her work ethic. Auntie Sheila's been doing this for so long and she does it with pride every single time. Thank you, Auntie Sheila. Pam's Funeral Parlor and MTSS Hall, once again, a sterling job. Thank you for all the arrangements. We will follow with songs until the funeral leaves with the priest, and I invite you now to give your final blessings to my mother as she departs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi. Those of you who did not view, those of you who came down, please come forward. You can pay your respects to Amma, thereafter the family. Hari Ambale Terse Harumarande Anandatene Yarulverande Ambale Terse Harumarande Anandatene Yarulverande Podunade Terse Punniyaniye Podunade Terse Punniyaniye Puravaranam Pugal Kanniyaniye Puravaranam Pugal Kanniyaniye Ambale Terse Harumarandene Anandatene Aruvirande Anandakuri Ilabiriye Anandakuri Ilabiriye Arpudatene Malimane Arpudatene Malimani Ambale Terse Harumarandene Anandatene Aruvedane Shiva 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 Chinmayaneva சிவ 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 செப்பயது சிவசுந்தர குல்கித நடராஜ தேவ சிவசுந்தர குல்கித நடராஜ தேவ அம்பலத்தரசே அருமருந்தேனே ஆனந்த தேனே அருவிழந்தே ஆனந்த தேனே அருவிழந்தே கருணநிதிய சபபதிய கருணநிதிய சபபதிய கதிமணிதியே பசுபதியே கதிமணிதியே பசுபதியே அம்பல தரிசே அருமருந்தேனே ஆனந்த தேனே அருவிழந்தே நடராஜன் எல்லாருக்கும் நல்லவனே நடராஜன் எல்லாருக்கும் நல்லவனே நல்ல எல்லாம் செய்ய வல்லவனே நல்ல எல்லாம் செய்ய வல்லவனே அம்பல
time off and being here with them during this time of bereavement. For all those of you that have rallied around to put the funeral arrangements together, for those of you that have contributed whether in cash or in kind, for the various floral tributes, the messages of sympathies and condolences, our brother Nelson Munyan and his team here for the rendition of the divine hymns, and also those of you that could not be here in person today but are online. They would also like to say a very big thank you to each and every one of you. We are shortly going to proceed from here to the Clara State Crematorium for cremation at 2 p.m. Before we conclude in prayer, I'm going to ask for the immediate family members to come through to say their last goodbyes before we do proceed. Thank you.
அம்மா அன்னையே அன்பான தேவி அருமை தாயே ஆவியானவளே அம்மா அன்னையே அன்பான தேவி அருமை தாயே அம்மா அன்னையே அன்பான தேவி அருமை தாயே ஆவியானவளே 10 மாசம் என்னை சுமந்து பெற்று என் அருமை தாய்வளே என்னை சுமந்து பெற்று என் அருமை தாய்வளே உலகத்தை ஊட்டினாயின் உயிரையும் நிதானம்மா உலகத்தை கரைச்சி பாலூட்டினாயின் உயிரையும் நிதானம்மா அம்மா அன்னையே அன்பான தேவி அருமை தாயே ஆவியானவளே என்னையே வளர்த்து படாத பாடு நீ பட்ட பெரும் அவஸ்தை என்னையே வளர்த்து படாத பாடு நீ பட்ட பெரும் அவஸ்தை சோறுட்டி தாளாட்டி ஆளாக்கி என்னை முதல் தெய்வம் நீதானம்மா சோறுட்டி தாளாட்டி ஆளாக்கி என்னை முதல் தெய்வம் நீதானம்மா அம்மா நல்ல
என்று